Cheers, guys. Epix 911. Welcome to this celebration episode, Virtual Reality's 1 year since launch birthday. And man, guys, what a year it's been. We've seen so much freaking change this last year. It's been absolutely nuts. And I gotta admit, as I was kind of preparing and thinking about what I was gonna say, I had a little bit of envy. Okay, a lot of envy, especially for those of you who got to try out the DK1 and DK2 versions of the Oculus Rift. And the reason is you guys got to see the kind of jump that the rest of us really didn't get to see and won't get to see until we move to 4K. Whereas you guys saw the jump from 720p right up to 1080p, which is awesome. But we're going to get to that. We're going to get to some other subjects dealing with the 1 year anniversary. Let's kind of rewind things and talk about what it was like for me back then. So I kind of did things in a little bit of a different order, in the sense that even though the actual launch date was March 28th for the Rift, and then HTC Vive followed suit April 5th, 2016. So they were about a week apart, right? Well, for me, the first VR unit that I purchased was the HTC Vive. And the reason for that is, even at the time, sight unseen, hadn't tested it anywhere, I was wanting to have not just the seated or standing experience with VR, but I wanted the room scale experience. And yeah, what happened with that? Well, the HTC Vive arrives, and guys, here's the box. This is still the original box. When I opened it, it felt like Christmas. And I can honestly say, and this is super nerdy, I totally get that. And guys, I wear the geek on the sleeve, so I don't give a rat's arse. But when I opened this box for the first time, it honestly was the best feeling of opening a box probably since my Commodore 64, which took me close to 3 years of paper route money to get. So I open it, I see the base stations, these sexy little squares, cube things that ultimately gave it, and continues to give it, probably the best room scale tracking experience that's out there. Still, it's a really accurate system. So I go through those first few weeks, and probably the best game that you could use to introduce somebody was one of the games I used to introduce myself, and that was Space Pirate Trainer. And why I say that is, especially for Gen Xers like me, among the first arcade games we played were games like Galaxian, Galaga, and Space Pirate Trainer is the VR version of exactly that. Almost the same pacing, the same gameplay style, except ratchet up about 3 billion% and have it take place in VR, which blew my freaking mind immediately. It was just that immersive. So, had my HTC Vive, things are ticking along really good, and then catastrophe. Those of you who know, that was also the point where the channel really started taking off, was not just having a VR focus, but my issue with this dying on me. Now, what a lot of people had happen was, at the time, was where the cables go into the HMD, you get a loose connection. And believe me, guys, I tried that. I had exhausted absolutely everything. And unfortunately, it ended up being the HMD. That was the problem. It wasn't the cables or the connection. I was actually one of those rare instances where the HMD was to blame. Because for a lot of people, it was this 3-in-1 cable and its connectors causing the issue. Now, to prevent that, I ended up creating my own Velcro system, which gives it just enough slack that you can see that there's never anything tugged on. even if this was to fall and I was to catch it here, I'm catching it by the Velcro point. That slack remains, as you can see, right? At that point, I was so not wanting to be without my Vive again that it caused me to come up with something. And that was the end result of that. And I'm happy I discovered it. Haven't had an issue since. So when that happened, I was devastated. No virtual reality because I hadn't received my Rift yet. Thankfully, the Rift arrives and immediately I love this little unit. It's more comfortable than the Vive. In my opinion, it fits nicer on the face. I've said this before, if I had to pick just one unit, if I was backed up, gun to my head, whatever, or, you know, the old desert island scenario, you can take one with you, Epics. Which do you take? I would take the HTC Vive, just because I still believe it can do most of the things that I enjoy. Ultimately, it has the widest reach and range for me personally for VR experiences and games. So I had that whole debacle, and that's where the website or the channel really started to do well, was my issue with HTC Vive. Now, thanks to one of you, I discovered Daniel O'Brien, and like I said, of all the executives of any company that I've ever dealt with, you can say what you want about HTC, Valve, all of that. Daniel is a stand-up person, and he's an executive who not only has a passion for VR, but he gets customer service and he cares about customers. He was able to accelerate things for me, which I'll always be grateful for. And to you guys for putting him in my line of sights in terms of contacts. So my Rift arrives. Elite Dangerous is the favorite game of mine those first few weeks, and I enjoyed it with the Vive. The problem, guys, that I had with it is the depth of space. For whatever reason, and I firmly believe it's software related, i.e. this is something they can fix. Space did not feel deep. Play Eve Valkyrie or other space games on the Vive and it's fine. But Elite Dangerous, there was no depth to space. It looked like an artificial layer 20, 30 feet out in front of you. Something you could touch, like a fabric. It wasn't space. So I immediately tried it on the Rift, and I have to say, using the Rift is my favorite way to experience Elite Dangerous. Even the clarity of text owing to the non-full Fresnel lens design, I find better for legibility because text remains clear from center to edge. Whereas with the Vive's Fresnel lens, the closer you get to the edge, the more blurry the text gets, which is a function of the lens technology. It's not something you can change through software. You can better accommodate it, you can't fix it. And so for me, the Rift became my favorite for Elite Dangerous. I still love them both. Obviously, you look at my quick looks, it's a pretty equal split. So enjoyed these both over the months. Fast forward to October, and we get this baby right here. Sony PlayStation VR. And I first heard about it when it was Project Morpheus. Love the way it looked. And for those of you who've tried the game, or rather tried this HMD, you're probably going to agree that it is the most comfortable HMD bar none. It is an amazingly comfortable device. And part of that is its design, or the majority of it is the design. You've got this portion that rests on your forehead, and this portion which, once you retract it like this, rests on the back of your head. So the end result, the visor rests up against your face, but it doesn't press onto your face like the Rift and Vive design. So this is probably the most comfortable HMD I've ever used. And I've got 4 here to base that on. 5 if you consider the older model of the Gear VR, but essentially that was the same other than color. So yeah, Sony launches theirs and we get a slew of titles. So it launches with several titles that I really enjoyed playing. But then things kind of go silent. And come December, we're wondering, why is Sony not pushing? Is it not selling well, but they're not marketing? What the hell's going on? And yet all the signs pointed to sales being strong because you couldn't get a Sony PlayStation VR bundle like this one in the stores. Stock was nowhere to be found. And as soon as stock came in, it went out. Somebody snapping it up. It ended up being a supply chain issue that they sold more than they had anticipated in specific regions. So they had to shuffle supply chain, and end result, things turned into a gong show. We then found out just a few months ago that they actually had sold close to 1 million units. Sales were fine, not as good in Japan as they had hoped, which is part of that supply issue. They had a lot of stock tied up there that they then had to redistribute globally to kind of make up for that demand. So the other big thing that happens after the Sony PlayStation VR launches is we get these babies here. The Oculus Touch controllers. And if you want to talk comfort, probably the most comfortable VR controller that there is, right, is this controller here. I like my Vive controllers, I really do, the wand-based ones. But if I had to pick between them, this would be the one I pick, even though I know I said I would take this on the deserted island. It's complicated. There's lots of variables, but the touch feels good. It's got a really nice feel and design. So that's kind of how the launches went and my introduction to each of those. One of the things I've been consistent on from day one is Locomotion. And just to really simplify things, because things are never really this simple, there are people who get VR motion sickness, and there are people who don't get VR motion sickness. That's it, enough said. That's the story. Of course, like I said, things are rarely that cut and dry, black and white, whatever analogy you want to use. It's generally more complicated. But one thing I maintained right from day one is every single game should have, at minimum, 2 options for locomotion. A teleportation-based one and a smooth-based, motion-based one. Even if the smooth motion, has to take some shortcuts, accommodate both. At the time, we didn't understand resources for these devices, and I know some people kind of took comment to that and said, you can't expect companies to do that, but we have seen that trend now. Most games coming out cater to both. I don't expect 6 examples of each every single game that comes out, but a basic implementation for teleportation and smooth motion, and you're good to go. You cater to the wide majority of VR users. You're going to get high 90s that way, percentage-wise. If you cater to one over the other, at best, it's a 50-50 proposition. You're talking female gamers, the stats are even more dire for motion sickness. That's just the reality. So, Touch comes out. The Locomotion thing more or less stabilizes by December. We get into the new year and we start getting better communication from the folks at Sony. We find out they've been selling well. They had had supply chain issues, basically all the stuff I just talked about. The touch controllers, which launched beautifully in the sense that, forget supply chain, in the sense that they worked. They tracked accurately. With an update, stopped working as well. And we had a period of time of about 2 months where the tracking was subpar. Now, to their credit, Oculus mentioned that, and they worked on fixing it. The first patch didn't really do much. Subsequent patches did. And happy to report, as of right now, the tracking is pretty damn good. And you ultimately, with 3 cameras, 4 if you really want to get OCD about it, you are going to have almost as good tracking as your HTC Vive. There's still some configuration and tweaking required, but you're getting really damn close to the point where I'd say go with the unit you find most comfortable. that has the games you want, you're going to have a pretty equal room scale experience. So that was definitely the case. We haven't talked about this unit here. This is the Gear VR. And the Gear VR of all of these is the one that has the highest install base of any of them. The numbers that this thing has, every single one of these guys would trip over themselves to have. 5 million plus units out there. Most of those were promotional or, very heavily discounted units. And the end result of that is there's probably a lot gathering dust. You've probably got low millions that aren't being used of the 5 million. I'm confident in that. It's still a decent solution. I end up using this today primarily for media. If I'm watching videos, checking out 360-degree content, etc. But I rarely use this for gaming, even though it's not bad. Like, I've got a decent controller, the Steel series, that I use with it. It works, but the lack of tracking for me is huge and critical. It's something that you need. So it gets used, but probably not as much as the others. Now let's talk about graphics, which is huge, and how the different technologies went about it last year. So, for example, with these two, the Rift and the Vive, everything happens PC side. You're tethered, and your graphic card and CPU, with the GPU being the number one consideration, they determine the performance and frame rate, in short, the experience you're going to get in VR. The better your video card and CPU, the better the experience. So I've got an i7 with a 1080 Founders Edition. And as a result, I have really good VR on the PC. Sony, likewise, but much more simplified. You got two choices. The regular PlayStation or the Pro. The Pro being the better option for virtual reality. So I tend to do most of that on my PlayStation 4 Pro. You've got units like the Gear VR, which base performance entirely on the cell phone. So whatever phone you have that you put in there, that's the GPU power that you're ultimately going to get. And there's a third option. So you've got your PC or console, put those on the same slate. You've got your cell phone. And then there's a third option, which some vendors are using, like Qualcomm, where they supply the graphics and the CPU within the HMD, i.e. an all-in-one unit, right? So how did we come out? What's kind of the summary of the first year? Well, we had tethered experiences. We have pretty decent tracking by the end of 2016. Room scale-wise with the Rift and the Vive. The Gear VR, it's not really a factor, the tracking, but due to software updates and improvements along the way, it's done pretty well. Likewise, the Sony. So you've got 4 units, 5 if you include the Daydream, that represent 2016 VR pretty well. The next topic we're going to talk about is the whole co-op multiplayer thing. This is something that the press and detractors of VR bring up frequently. They will tell you things like it's antisocial, it's not cooperative, it's going to alienate people and destroy society. All of that is stuff people have said. Let's put the brakes on that. Absolutely not the frickin' case at all. In fact, my argument is virtual reality has the potential to probably be the most social of the gaming technology that's out there. With VR, you can not only meet up with people across the world, you can do it in the same location, you can do it remotely, you can have cooperative play. Play raw data and do raw data with your buddies, and you will have one of the best co-op experiences ever. And the list goes on and on. There's some games that even do just a novel twist to that, where you've got one person using the HMD, the other manning the computer, yet working together or against each other. Panoptic, I believe, is the game where the PC user is actively trying to catch the HMD user, and each has a completely different perspective on the game, yet they're playing it together. So never bought that argument. Even if you do multiplayer, Onward, for example, just an amazing example of what's possible with VR. And we haven't even touched on multiplayer games, which is another potential. Hasn't been realized yet, but very well will be in the future. It's definitely going to be something that VR is going to be able to do well. I have no doubt of that. All right, let's talk about haptics. There's generally two types of haptics that you're going to get. You're going to get action-based haptics, where programmers specifically program a game to produce haptic effects based on your actions. In other words, pull the trigger on a gun, feel a bit of that haptic kickback, right? Your actions determine that. The second method is sound-based, and an example of that would be the Subpack M2, where even if a programmer hasn't specifically programmed a game to create haptic, and scripted haptic, in my opinion, the action-based, is probably the better solution in that you can really tailor it to the on-screen action. The advantage of the other option, the sound-based one, is that almost every single game is going to work. If there's a loud explosion, you're going to feel it rumble around your chest. If there's gunfire going off or bassy music volume, that can basically be felt. So a car crash, which has that thud noise and then, all of that crashing noise that takes place, would be felt by that second method. So to me, they're both good solutions, but ultimately I think they're going to converge. I think future haptic devices are going to be a combination of sound and action-based, so that even if a game isn't programmed specifically to take advantage of haptics, you're still going to feel it in any given game when there's loud sound effects. Let's talk about games as kind of the next area. So a year goes by. I've talked about which unit, if you made me pick one, well, what were the games that I enjoyed? So in no order, guys, there's 12 games that I came up with. Maybe there'd be corrections here. I have forgotten something, but for the most part, I think it's accurate. So we've got Elite Dangerous. And I'm also going to mention the platform I prefer if there's multiple. So I'll mention the platform. So Elite Dangerous on my Rift. It happens to be my favorite VR game, period. And, we're going to talk about one more aspect, which is controls, in a second. So Elite Dangerous Rift, Resident Evil 7, PlayStation VR, Doom 3, Vive, Raw Data, Vive, Arizona Sunshine, Vive, Project Cars, Vive, and lest you think there's not going to be any Rifts, we've got, yes, some Rift ones, Dirt Rally Rift, Damaged Core Rift, The Climb Rift, and then QuivVR, Vive, Wrath of the Fire God, Vive, and finally Audio Shield, Vive. So those are the 12 games. If I had to pick 12 to take with me to that same damn island, I'm starting to hate the place already, those would be the games I'd pick. And like I said, they're in no order other than Elite Dangerous is my number one, period. Pretty much from a year ago to now, it's never lost that position. So the reason I wanted to mention the games first is to now talk about controls a little bit more. So we touched on that with the Vive and the touch controller. But one of the most important things when I get asked, like, what controller do you prefer with Vive or Rift? That's a common question. I get asked it a ton. My answer is always, it depends on the game. And the reason for that is I don't have a favorite. I just have games that to me require a specific control set to excel. Play a racing game, don't give me anything other than a steering wheel and pedal combo. I don't want to play on a gamepad or a keyboard and mouse or a HOTAS or any of that stuff. Let me play the damn game with a racing wheel. If I play a game like Elite Dangerous, let me play it on my HOTAS. That's the best tool for flight sims, other than like the yoke sticks you can get for Microsoft Flight Simulator, etc. But for the spacey World War I, World War II dogfight era type combat in Elite Dangerous, Star Citizen, HOTAS all the way. So my recommendation is whatever the best controller is for a game is what you should use. And yeah, if you can't afford it, fine. I get that. But even a controller like this has a range. The Pro X52, yeah, it's an expensive stick. It might come down a little bit now that it's part of the Logitech family, SciTech, but it's still going to be around $200. However, I've got my other flight stick and throttle over there, almost as good, $70 for the pair. So absolutely there are cheap options. Probably your most expensive would be the wheel and pedal, right? There are some cheap options under $100, but for the most part, it's a little tougher with those. So yeah, for me, this last year has been about finding the best controller for the task. And that would be my advice. If you ask me that same question, which controller should you get? Some games are going to work great with the Vive and Touch, others with the HOTAS, wheel, etc. That's how you should kind of go about it. So that's pretty much been the last year. What about the future? And this is the part that has me so stoked, and where I said at the beginning, I'm envious of you guys who got to see 720 to 1080, because I missed that. And many of us missed that. However, what we will be able to see is 1080p going to 4K and beyond. And I am so stoked about that. The reason is, while the screen door effect doesn't bother me, I do notice it. You play the right type of game, you're going to see it. And eventually, 4K and beyond, resolution's going to get so high, it is going to blast screen door effect to oblivion. It just won't exist. You're never going to see it again. That is a certainty. So if you're one of those people who's bothered by that, just have that comforting thought in the back of your head. Eventually, it will be no more. It's going to cost you, yeah, but there will come a day when it's gone completely, and we can't wait. So the 4K, 8K, and beyond, I am so excited about that. Wireless excites me. If I'm seated, I don't really care. In a sense, having the wired, playing Elite Dangerous, for example, just kind of mimics what a jet fighter pilot has, right? They've got all kinds of stuff dangling off. There's a lot of equipment that they wear, helmet-wise, communications equipment. So I don't have a problem with that in a seated cockpit experience at all. It's more the room scale. And even then, like if you're playing ISS space station game, you do a spacewalk, you're tethered. So even there, it probably wouldn't bother me. But with that said, yes, ultimately, I want to be untethered, and that's the future. It's coming. So we've talked about the resolution is going to get better. We know sound is going to get better. We know that wireless is going to improve things. We're going to get better haptics all across the board. More senses are going to be brought into the experience. Guys, 5 to 10 years from now is where I'm really excited. And where I wish I was 20 years younger, because those of you who are millennials now in your early 20s, late teens, guys, you are the ones I envy the absolute most. And I say that not in a nasty, mean way. I just wish I had those 20, 30 extra years to see where it's going to go, because it's going to be freaking amazing. And you guys are going to have a front seat. And hopefully this aging body of mine doesn't crap out on me in 20 years, and I'll be right there with you enjoying it. So all of that's converging. We've got a year ahead of us where we're going to see not just amazing games starting to come out, because you got to admit they're getting better by the quarter, right? But what we're also going to see is a metric crap ton of products. Once all those Windows HMDs are out, and hell, I'm not even including Project Alloy. You've got the Vive technology products like LG's, which is based on that. It's a Vive compatible, right? Steam VR compatible, OS VR, PlayStation. You've got so many options out there. By the end of the year, I think it's going to be massively cluttered, like how the computer scene looked in the 80s. Is that sustainable? I don't think so. That's where we're going to start seeing attrition. And as we go into then 2018, not all of them are going to be successful. They're going to start falling to the wayside. Only the victors survive. And my one hope for that is the ones that survive carry forward with better technology. So, you know, you're talking Betamax versus VHS. You hope the better technology, not just the cheaper option, survives. So in short, guys, it has been an amazing freaking year for VR. Absolutely amazing. I can't wait to see where we're going. I think there's going to be all kinds of exciting things this year. And the certainty is we're going to be able to experience them together and just marvel at how awesome this hobby is of ours and how much better it's getting. Guys, thank you for all your support. Enjoying this with me, many of you, for this entire year. Let's hope it's many more to come. Guys, cheers as always.